right, ladies and gentlemen, it's time. The moment you've all been waiting for. By popular demand from my stream, it is time for the official Ornlu AoE Big Nomad tier list for, of course, patch 5.8, which is, this patch. So, it's been a long time since I've done one of these, and I was kind of waiting until the next balance patch was going to be released to do another 1v1 Arabia tier list, and I very well still may do that, but it's obviously become a meme on my stream. I guess if you're only watching me on YouTube, which I don't know how many of you are there, but a lot of experts these days have been playing, 4v4 Nomad, jokingly called Big Nomad, hence the name of this video and tier list. So it's just, we've been joking about it, and it's been a lot of fun, and, to be even semi-serious might be crossing the line, but I still thought it would be useful to talk about these civilizations, why they excel in specifically 4v4 Nomad, but this does apply to a lesser extent to 1v1 Nomad as well. I thought this would be useful because if you compare this to my last 1v1 Arabia tier list, you can see that although some of the civilizations are certainly in very similar spots, a lot of them have, shifted around quite a bit, for better and for worse. So I'll be going through this, breaking down all the civilizations. It won't be, that serious. It's not like this is hours and hours and hours of research of, hundreds and hundreds of tournament games. This is mostly just for fun and some theory crafting. So yeah, this isn't meant to be too serious. It's not like I have analyzed hundreds of tournament games for 4v4 Nomad. It's just not a setting that you see too often because I would argue Nomad isn't the most competitive of maps. But still, it's a lot of fun. It's still useful, I think, to talk about these civilizations. You can probably learn something about the game through this thought exercise. So without further ado, let's get into this, shall we? All right, so this time I thought I would give you something a bit more interesting to look at in the background than just, my face rambling. So there's just a good old Big Nomad game taken from today's stream going to be going on in the background as I talk about this. It's not anything in particular, but just something to look at, I guess. Anyway, of course, starting with the S tier, the very best civilizations for Big Nomad. This is, I think, none too controversial. I think that these four civilizations really do stand out, head and shoulders above the rest, which is why they get their own special tier all to themselves. Starting, of course, with Chinese, the single best nomad civilization, to the surprise of approximately 2% of people, if that. So, of course, the reason that Chinese are going to be strong on any nomads type map, that is to say, any map where you don't start with a town center, is just because you start with the 6 villagers. So you can get your town center working so much faster, generally speaking. You can get your resource collection going right away, and the villager boost that you will be getting is even more pronounced than on any other map type. Just Chinese, so incredibly strong. And then beyond that, they have a very broad tech tree, super strong late game, elite Chukonu, siege rams, bombard towers, you know the drill. It's not even Mongols, Kappa. But yeah, Chinese obviously going to be the best nomad civ. Have been always, probably always will be. Malians going to be coming in at number 2. So I do think they're a little bit worse than Chinese, but not very much. So I would say like Malians I think are fairly close at number 2. And that's because Malians, along with Persians, who we'll be talking about next, but they are the only 2 civilizations that have enough wood to build a fishing ship, along with your dock, of course, at the very beginning of the game. So what you'll do is you'll take one of your starting villagers, whichever one you would guess is closest to the edge of the map and therefore the water, build a dock, and then you can build a fishing ship right away just to instantly kickstart your food economy. Fishing ships gather food just so quickly, and it can really be just a massive boost. And then beyond that, and why I actually place them above Persians, is Malians have the insane tech tree, especially in the mid-game, where you can go for monks, and you can go for cavalry or crossbowmen, whatever you want. You can even go for Gebettos. They're actually a fairly strong raiding unit on this map, and there's just so many options. Good boom, of course, and that's why I would definitely put them at number 2. As I was talking about, Persians, very similar to Malians, because of their extra wood they start with. You can also go for the fishing ship right away. And then beyond that, faster working docks and TCs is going to facilitate your economy. and of course, very strong late game in the form of paladins, hand cannons, whatever you so desire. In a team game setting, it's usually just going to be for paladins, maybe halberdiers and siege rams. But the reason I put them below Malians is because they do lack a super powerful unique unit. Sorry, war elephants. And they lack the monk tech tree that Malians have, even if their late game is a little bit stronger. But still, very, very powerful nomad civilization that you're going to feel quite good about getting. And then, of course, 4 will be Mayans. You can't have a tier list for civilizations in AoE 2 without, Mayans at least somewhere near the top. And I think that Mayans, they're not quite as powerful as they are on your Arabias or Regicide fortresses, but they're still one of the best civilizations in the game. They do start with that extra villager. It does help a little bit in getting your TC up and running. No, it's not, Chinese with this 3 extra villagers, but still, every little bit does help. And then beyond that, Nomad is the type of map where you can usually sort of get fast castles off. And if you have stone nearby, that means fast castle plumed archers. And that is just such a powerful strategy at just like its base level that anytime you can get that off on pretty much any map type, it's going to be insanely powerful. And this is no different. Archers and cav archers are generally less seen on Nomad than they are on Arabia, just because you can usually get up to the castle age, and it takes a little while for the archers to, you get enough archers to really snowball their value. But plumed archers, they're of course going to be something of an exception, and Mayans, always going to be a very potent civ. The reason I don't put them higher is that beyond the villager, extra villager at the start, there really isn't anything particular to Nomad as to why Mayans would be super strong. I think they do lack some of the flexibility and just sheer Nomad-specific power that the 3 civs above them have. But still, Mayans are just so powerful at like a base level, and they do have that little bit of extra bonus to work with, so definitely do round out our S tier. Beyond S tier, of course, we have A tier, because that's how power rankings work for some reason. A tier civs, all, what is this, 6, 7 civs, there we go, counting. They're all very strong in their own right. I do think they're a shade below the S tier civs, but that's not to say that any of these civs are bad whatsoever. I think they're all very strong. I think they're all going to be good bets. And if you're, rolling any of these civs, because in most of the big Nomad games we've been casting, yeah, they've all been playing random civs, but you're still happy to be getting any of these civs. With that said, 5 is going to be Koreans, perhaps very surprisingly, and perhaps controversially, but I have talked to several people, and a lot of people actually think that Koreans are indeed one of the strongest nomad civilizations. I think they do lack just the sort of universal power that the S tier civs have, which is why I made them the cutoff to S tier. But still, Nomad is like the one map where the extra villager line of sight is incredibly useful, because it sort of means you almost always have a much cleaner start, as you'll be able to see resources much more easily. You can probably place your town center in a bit of a better location. You can probably find those few extra sheep or boars that you might otherwise have missed. And it actually is quite a useful bonus. Beyond that, because of the very erratic starts in terms of TC positionings, you very often see tower rushes as a part of the big nomad experience. So yeah, Korean tower rush, it's pretty good. In Castle Age as well, of course, getting guard tower and the extra range means that mangonel pushes are very difficult, if not impossible. And then war wagons, turtle ships even, because we're talking about fast castles on water maps, they're all going to be incredibly powerful units. Siege onagers, bombard cannons, bombard towers. Koreans just have a lot in their arsenal throughout the majority of the game. The reason they're so weak on Arabia is just their lack of eco bonus and fairly mediocre feudal age and castle age in a non-tower rush setting. But we kind of get to sort of, not if not skip those, at least expedite them quite a bit on Nomad, which really does improve Koreans' strength as a civilization drastically, I would argue. 6, we have Italians. I don't think there is anything going to be too crazy about this. All of their bonuses are useful. Cheaper age up, cheaper fishing ships, and dock techs. All of those things are going to be quite useful on any map with a decent amount of water, and Nomad is going to be no exception, especially because it is a map that uptime, power spikes can always be incredibly powerful, especially if you're very near another player and you get up to the feudal age 30 seconds ahead of them. Well, that can, of course, make all the difference in getting a tower up or your first mangonel out or scouts even. There's just a lot you can do with Italians, and then condos may be useful, probably not as much as like a team islands or a migration sort of thing, but still, it's an option. And then you still do have that nice flexible tech tree with your knights and monks and archers and even genbos in the late game. Just a very, very powerful all-around civ. 7, Berbers. So Berbers, I think, in general, again, a very powerful civilization, usually pretty strong on most map types, but they do have a little bit of an extra boost on Nomad, I would argue, because of the faster moving villagers. Usually it's just a little bit of a quality of life defensive bonus on any map where you start with a TC. But because your villagers start so far apart, especially on Nomad in a 4v4 setting, which is usually the parameters I'm talking about, but even all the way down to a 1v1, the faster moving villagers mean you can just get to your villagers to where they need to go to build the TC faster, and that can save you a lot of time and really facilitate your economy in the beginning of the game. So that's going to be, pretty strong. And then beyond that, you can go fast castle into camel archers, you can go for knights, and all that is going to be quite good. And then on the water, I already think the Berber Navy is pretty underrated because they're the only civilization with their faster ship move speed that can chase down enemy ships or run away from enemy ships, depending on whether or not you're going to win the fight. And really, Berbers are the only civ that can do that in the entire game. And the water is not like land where you have like walls to retreat to or anything like that. Usually it's just straight up fight. So if you have the advantage, you can run with it or sail with it. And then beyond that, of course, they don't really have the same like late game power as Persians, as they do lack Paladin, but still cheap Cavalier and Camel Archers are nothing to scoff at. Malay going to be coming in at 8. Again, a civilization that's going to be incredibly powerful on any map that has to do with water. And again, sort of like Italians, the faster age up is going to be quite useful. It kickstarts your economy and generally, boosts you in doing whatever strategy you feel like doing. Siege monk pushes can also be powerful, just like they are in Arena, where Malay are probably the best civilization. And in the late game, as you can see in the background footage, there's often a lot of coastline on Nomad, especially if you have an inland lake or bay area, and that means harbor spam can be really overpowered. Just keep on building those docks, they can produce ships, and they can defend you, and they don't cost stone, and it's great. Bombard towers as well. They're just a great all-around civilization. The reason I wouldn't put them higher is that they don't really have like a death ball to work with, and it can be kind of hard if you're like spamming Karambit warriors. If your castles are kind of far away, then it'll take a long time to sort of keep that momentum up and rolling. But overall, still pretty good civilization. Yeah, they're limited a bit by their cavalry, but usually that's not too big of a deal. Beyond them will be the Spanish, number 9. They might be a little bit lower if we're just talking about a 1v1 Nomad and not team games, where they can make use of their incredibly powerful trade bonus. I mean, just in any team game setting, Spanish are going to be pretty strong. On top of that, they do get a boost specifically to Nomad in that the faster working builders will kind of work in a similar vein to the Berber faster moving villagers, although possibly even a bit more powerful depending on how close your villagers are at the beginning. And you can get your TC up and running, get your economy going that much more quickly. And then beyond that, the feudal age is of course going to be a little bit rocky because you can't really go for archers if that's what you need to be going for. But if you're in a situation where you perhaps don't have stone to go into conquistadors, because that's obviously going to be your ideal mid game, again, things can be a little bit rough. Yeah, you can go for knights, you can go for monk siege, but a lot of the civs above them can do that as well, but and a little bit better. But still, if you can get that fast castle conquistadors rolling, probably not quite as powerful as Mayans, because Spanish don't have the early to mid game economy that Mayans do, but it's still going to be quite deadly and hard to stop. And then you bring paladins and bombard towers and halbs in the late game, siege rams as well. You're going to be quite happy. It's just, there's always going to be that slight awkwardness with Spanish on any map that you don't start with walls if you're in a situation where you want to make archers and can't, or a situation where you want to be gathering stone but you cannot for whatever reason. Very fittingly, Portuguese will be right after Spanish. Of course, the two Iberian civilizations. And Portuguese, a little bit controversial, I guess, in the free cartography at the very beginning of the game, because especially in a big nomad setting, you can have a lot of players all, scrambled across the entirety of the map, and you can kind of struggle to get your bearings. At least from as far as I can tell, it's really not that big of a deal. You can usually get yourself situated. Just make sure you cycle through your idle villager hotkeys, whatever that is. I believe the default is period. And then, yeah, beyond that, the free cartography is going to be really helpful in just the very chaotic setting. Just make sure that you know how you're situated in relationship to your allies, what their situation's like, and just makes communication a lot easier, even if you are using voice chat. And then, of course, beyond that, very strong navy, extra HP. One of the few civs actually gets a naval boost in the early game, and they have the cheaper cost on their ships, and it's nice. Fast castle, organ guns can be very strong. Monks as well, potentially in siege, or knights, or crossbowmen. They just have a lot going for them. Yes, they do lack the booming power of a lot of civilizations above them, or the, I guess, the raw military power in various stages of the game, but still, just a good all-around civilization. You can kind of go for pretty much anything and be okay in doing so, and they'll even be, fairly comfortable in a death ball situation. They're just not a very fast civilization, and that most of their best units are quite slow. And then rounding out our A tier of very good civilizations, if not like the very best, we'll have Japanese. Again, no stranger to being highly placed on any sort of water-based map. Extra powerful fishing ships in a map where there's a lot of early water aggression, going to be quite powerful, especially if you and your team win water. Then you can be going for big fish boom, and that is just going to be one of the strongest possible economies in the entire game, and that is going to be quite good. The reason that I wouldn't put them higher, because yes, they have a very broad tech tree in terms of various military options. They do always kind of lack that late game punch that most of the civs, actually probably even all of the civs above them possess, except maybe like Malians. But yeah, it's usually you're struggling to find something to do that's like exceptionally powerful. Yeah, samurai, halberdiers, Yasuma keeps, they're all going to be pretty good, but not the sort of raw population efficiency that you're generally looking for in a big team game setting. So that will round out our first couple tiers. I'll just do one video on this, so we'll just jump right to the next one. But yeah, these civilizations I think are all going to be characterized as like your sort of most powerful half of the civilizations. Got 15 civs here, 31 civs total. You can see that a lot of the civilizations in the game are quite powerful on Nomad, which actually leads to a decent balance of games. But let's go into the next civs, shall we? So this video is probably going to be fairly long, but I don't care. We got our mid-tier civs now, which, as you can see, is another decent chunk of the civilizations. We've got, what, 13? 11? Math is hard, but we're not editing that out because, you got to get the real Ornlu experience. But regardless, we'll jump into our B tier now. These are civilizations that, I mean, it seems kind of obvious, but they're not quite as good as the A tier civs, but they're not as bad as the C tier civilizations. These are civilizations that I find are pretty powerful, but there's usually some sort of condition attached to their power, and they might be pretty lackluster in certain settings, which, with Nomad being so random and crazy, you can get these sorts of uncomfortable situations for these civs a bit more frequently than you might in other map types. But with that said, let's talk about Mongols, my personal favorite civilization in the game. And of course, if you can start with like 3 boars near you or a ton of deer, then you are just feeling great about life. And you can just get a super fast uptime, have lots of food. You can go into fast tower rush, or just attacking with fire ships, or even a fast castle potentially. And then your late game, of course, the same reason Mongols are always going to be good. Mangudai and Siege, always going to be the cornerstone of a powerful late game army. The only problems you run into are, well, sometimes you don't have any hunt near you, and then you're just feeling really bad about life. Or maybe you don't have stone for castles because it's denied to you, or something like that. And of course, your mid-game economy is going to be a little bit weaker, and that's just what Mongols have to deal with. Navy, it's pretty good, but not amazing. So yeah, that's why I did have to put them in B tier, although it is at the top of B tier, as you can pretty consistently get hunt and therefore a fast feudal age time. At 13, we'll have Ornlu Byzantines. and they are again going to be a pretty strong nomad civilization, as opposed to some of the actually I think all of the other civilizations here. It's not their problem isn't their lack of options or like stages in the game where they're quite weak. They're just kind of consistently strong throughout pretty much every stage of the game. It's just that they don't have that overwhelming strength and just sheer power that most of the civs above them possess. You know, all of the civs above them will have periods where you're just like, oh my god, the civ is so OP, how am I supposed to deal with them? You don't really get that as much when facing Byzantines. The cheap trash, yes, it can be very useful, even in a team game setting, although less so than 1v1s. And then Cataphracts, bit of a pipe dream. You do actually have the very strong fire ships, which I think is, again, kind of like Berbers, a little bit underrated on the water, and can certainly help you in the early game. And then, Town Watch to help you scout a little bit better, especially if you're up against a tower rush. Just kind of a good all-around civ, still lacking a bit in that booming department and that sort of late-game power unit that you might be looking for with another civilization. Vikings might be surprising to some people that they're so low, but of course we are talking about a world these days where, unlike AOC, one, your warship bonuses have been nerfed a little bit, and then you don't have fire ships, which means fire galleys can kind of wreck you if you're right next to your opponent's dock in the early game. And that is no fun at all. Yes, longboats are going to be quite powerful in the Castle Age, and through the rest of the game, but of course, you still lack that land army potential that most other civs have. The Viking late game land army, it's not exceptionally powerful. So you do kind of have you kind of fall off a little bit at the end of the game, but beyond that, of course, very strong economy with the free wheelbarrow and handcart. Yes, you're not really farming as much as a land map, but it's still going to be quite good. And then once you do get your longboat numbers, or I guess war galley numbers rolling, then you're going to be quite powerful for quite some time. And cheaper docks is going to be one of the best team bonuses as well in terms of everybody getting their docks up faster. Huns will be, I guess, tied, sort of, for our middle of the pack slot. And again, this might be a little bit surprising to people, as we did see Huns picked a lot in AOC Nomad. But unfortunately for Huns, because they start with less wood, it means they're a lot slower to get their fishing economy up and rolling, as you can't really afford a dock right away. Whereas most other civs are able to do that. So you do have to send the villager out, and that's really kind of a pain. Of course, once that early, headache is past you, you are doing quite good in terms of saving plenty of wood, and generally you're going to have a very flexible mid-game with cav archers or knights or whatever. Saving all that wood in the mid-game can help you in making ships, but of course the Hun late-game navy is horrible, and the late-game army can lack some of that heavy siege and, building, breaking potential that a lot of other civs have. And I mean, especially on maps like certain nomad generations where you have really big choke points, like the one in the background actually, where you can see on the mini-map where you have the big choke point in the north and then in the east on either side of that big lake. Huns can really struggle a bit, as they can't abuse their massive mobility as much as they could on Arabia. But still, once you get rolling, you're going to be quite strong, and you can just spam paladins at people, and usually that's a pretty good idea. Celts will be rounding out our B tier, a civilization, again, that it always is going to have a bit of an awkward mid to late Castle Age / early Imperial Age, but you really can't ignore the faster wood cutting bonus. Yes, it's even better than the Malian bonus, probably, on most maps, but unfortunately, because Malians get the discount front-loaded at like the very beginning of the game, Celts can't really, get their fishing ship out right away. They still do have to wait a little bit. But of course, as the game develops, you're just chopping 15% more wood than other civilizations with the same amount of villagers, and that's going to be quite powerful. And you can get lots of ships out, you can get lots of booming out, potentially even mangonels to push with or defend with in the mid-game, and you're just going to be, pretty well set so long as you're not getting overrun in late Castle Age, which is always going to be a concern, and why they do unfortunately have to be a little bit lower in the tier list. Of course, late game, their navy is pretty horrible, and then on top of that, if you're in a situation where Halb Ram, or Woad Raider Ram, Halb, whatever, isn't going to be amazing, then you don't really have any other options. Usually it's enough, but there are certain situations where what Celts have to offer. Maybe it's covered by another civilization on your team, and maybe just the game state is such that you would want the Celt player to be doing something else. If you're in a situation where the Celt player has to do that other thing, whatever it happens to be, you're probably going to be very sad. So moving on to the C tier, these are civilizations that are just like, they're fine. For lack of a better word. It's not like they're horrible. It's not like they're amazing. Usually, like, all of these civilizations are pretty powerful on just, your sort of generic map, but they don't really have anything that helps them on Nomad specifically, which I think is going to be the big distinction here. All of these civilizations are quite powerful. Yes, they all have their certain weaknesses, but generally considered quite powerful. But they just don't really have a Nomad-specific bonus to really sort of help them and put them over the top. Whereas all of the civilizations above them, I think, do have something that helps them very specifically on Nomad. So, of course, Indian's going to be at 17. Essentially, the lack of Nomad-specific bonus is why I put them in C tier as opposed to B tier, because I think that, Celts with the faster woodcutting, that is, disproportionately even more helpful on Nomad, whereas Indians, yeah, the cheaper villagers are great, but that's true on any map. That's not, that doesn't especially help you on Nomad. Maybe you'll be able to take advantage of the faster working shore fishermen, but that is certainly no guarantee, and I wouldn't say is even all that common. But beyond that, of course, you do have imp camels, which are always going to be quite nice to contribute. Your navy is at least decent. Your boom is going to be pretty good. Decent monks. I mean, that's all the normal reasons Indians are a pretty good civilization. That doesn't really change much. And because they are quite useful in the late game, and are generally pretty strong throughout most of the game, is why I do put them at the top of C tier. Britons are going to be at 18. Sometimes on Nomad you can spawn with a ton of sheep, and then you're feeling great as Britons. You're just, it's like you're playing Settlers of Catan, and you're just rolling in sheep with every dice toss, for the 10 of you who get that reference. But still, if you don't get that, then you don't really have much of an eco bonus to work with. Your navy is fine, but you're lacking, again, that sort of over-the-top boost. Your boom is going to be quite strong, but it's always the question of Britons is, what do you boom into? If you're in a situation where you don't really want to be making a ton of archers, then you're feeling pretty bad about life. But a lot of times, of course, archers can be quite good. And if you're in a situation where you're trying to slow push somebody down with like longbowmen and castles and warwolf trebs, you're going to be doing quite good for yourself, especially if you are boosted with a very strong boom. So yeah, Britons are going to be good, but again, just not great, nothing really over the top special. Our next civ, the Burmese, can be argued has a little bit of a Nomad boost, in that you have your free woodcutting upgrades to help you out, and of course wood is going to be such an important resource for your ships in the early to mid game. But beyond that, again, Burmese can be in a situation where, you really need archers for whatever reason, and you just can't really make them, at least very well. And then if you would like to go into a Rombai but don't have stone, that's going to be a big problem. Although Burmese do have options like knights or elephants or monk siege, or even like halberdiers in the late game, of course. You do have options as Burmese, but there is always going to be that slight awkwardness. And on Nomad in particular, I just kind of see them as like a slightly worse Spanish, because they don't have paladins. Yes, you do have elephants, but elephants are a lot harder to get into than paladins. You don't have the faster start due to the villager build speed, and you don't have conquistadors. Arambai are good, but conquistadors are probably a little bit better. Slavs going to be 20, which feels awfully low for a civilization that does feel so incredibly strong, borderline overpowered on a lot of other settings. But we're running into the problem here where Nomad is a map type where you want to use fishing ships heavily, which means you're not farming, or at least not farming as much as quickly, which means that the Slav eco bonus becomes less and less of an eco bonus and more like a footnote. But still, eventually you are going to need a big farming economy. Just fishing ships will lack in utility as the game progresses, and then your economy is going to be super powerful. You have siege and infantry with Druzhina and boyars potentially, all of which can be quite powerful. And you will have that super powerful late game, but you also really do lack a very impressive navy whatsoever. And that can be a bit of a problem if you are in a situation where your team needs somebody who can be contesting water, But if you're the only person on your team who can do so, and you're Slavs, you're gonna have a kind of a rough time against a Civ that has a better navy than you. So Slavs, they're still going to be quite powerful in a lot of situations, but will, I think, be a little bit inflexible, perhaps, and not as strong economically as on other map types. Again, just sort of lacking that nomad-specific punch. In a very similar vein, Franks will be 21, and like Slavs, they just kind of lack that sort of nomad-specific power. Yes, of course, if you can get a bunch of forage bushes near you, then you're feeling great, but that seems pretty rare in my experience, both playing and casting. And beyond that, I mean, your archer line is pretty horrible, your navy's pretty horrible, but smashing your opponent in the face with a ton of paladins boosted from chivalry stables, usually it works out pretty well. So it's just a matter of getting to that, and you don't really have that much of a super powerful economy to get you there. And then, of course, just that little bit of lack in flexibility can hamper you a little bit. But still, they're fine. It's not like you can't do anything with Franks. It's just more, they're middling. And rounding out our C tier, after being interrupted for a little while by a barking corgi, but it's all good, we have the Aztecs, which, again, kind of like the civilizations above them, are powerful civilization, or Aztecs are a powerful civilization in their own right, but really sort of lack that special je ne sais quoi for Nomad. And by je ne sais quoi, I just mean a bonus that is especially useful for Nomad. So, unlike Mayans, they don't have, and obviously they don't have the extra villager to help get their first TC up and running. They don't have a super powerful unique unit, but they do at least have their very good economy, which is why I still put them in C tier as opposed to D tier, which I'll get to next. But, Eagle Warriors, spamming them, usually going to be pretty good. Monk Siege push is always going to be very good as Aztecs. And, of course, like all the normal stuff that Aztecs do well, they can still pretty much do well here. Of course, this is a water map, and the Aztec Navy is one of, if not the worst in the game. But at least you can do fast fire ships with all their upgrades, so that's something. But yeah, just again, they're a fine civilization. It's nothing too special for Nomad. Now, finally, rounding out our last civilizations, unfortunately, our worst civilizations for Nomad, we'll have our D and F tiers. D tier, the civilizations are still acceptable, I would say. Like, you're not, desperately unhappy if you land these civilizations and playing random, but you're certainly not thrilled either. They either lack important economy bonuses, naval bonuses, or just powerful things to do in the late game, which you just most often see on Nomad. So Turks actually are going to be the one exception to that. They do have a pretty good economy bonus in the faster gold miners. They have a pretty powerful navy. They have tons of things to do when they have gold. They have, janissaries / gunpowder, bombard towers, cav archers, potentially even cavaliers, hussars, and camels. It's just, if they don't get gold, then you're pretty sad. Normally, this isn't as much of an issue in team games, like if we're, say, playing Arabia, but Nomad is kind of an exception to that as well, because just the way that the gold can be distributed, sometimes you might not have easy access to gold whatsoever, and then you're just kind of screwed. Might not have any access to stone, which can limit your options quite a bit, and you could be tower rushed or denied gold or anything along those lines, and you can be pretty sad as Turks. And of course, like their late game power, it is strong, but again, other than I guess extra long range cannon galleons, it's nothing especially powerful on Nomad in particular, although you can certainly make it work. Saracens will be 24 right after Turks, a civilization that really just lacks an economy bonus, plain and simple. They actually do have a naval bonus in the form of faster attacking galleys. This is less useful than it was in Age of Conquerors, and even in AOC it wasn't like the greatest bonus ever, just with the way galley wars tend to work out. But now that it's all fire galleys and fire ships in the early to mid game, that is even less useful. But of course, if you do get to the late game, and team games on Big Nomad often do get to the late game, you will have a lot of powerful things to do that are of course just going to be pretty gold intensive. Mamelukes, siege, monks, all that good stuff. but at least you have those at your disposal. And you do have the market bonus, which can be pretty helpful. So that's, that's something. But at least they do have several situations in which they can be quite powerful in the late game if you can get to that. They just don't really have the way to get there that you might want. Magyars are going to be next. Again, lacking any sort of real impactful economy bonus. Scout rushing, it has its uses, but it's certainly nowhere near as good as like Pocket, team game in Arabia, or just 1v1 on any open map. It's just nowhere near as good, and then beyond that, you don't really have anything special in terms of navy or economy or anything like that. Military, it's pretty powerful, kind of like a slightly more powerful version of the Huns late game, but Huns just do have the economy to help get you there and are just a lot faster in getting going, and they do have at least a strong navy in the feudal castle age area when they are saving plenty of wood, which is why Huns are just, I think, so much better than Magyars. And yeah, they lack anything special, but they also don't have the sorts of bonuses that help it really in any significant way on Big Nomad, which I think in general is what kind of separates these D tier civilizations from the C tier civilizations. Incas will be 26. A civilization that's really powerful for like 1v1 on open maps, and is really just kind of lackluster in team games due to the nature of their military being gold intensive counter units. Lends itself very well to 1v1s and quite poorly to team games, like even generally speaking. And this is certainly no exception. Again, lacking any sort of real economy bonus to help them out a ton. I guess you can get the free llama, which could give you a little bit of an early food boost if you just don't have any resources nearby, but that's just kind of making a really bad situation slightly less bad. And I guess technically you also get 15 extra stone from the stone you save on your starting TC, but that's usually not too big of a deal. Yes, their tower rush is very good, but it's nothing, I think, too great. And unlike, say, Spanish or Koreans, which are sort of the other big tower rushing civs, Incas don't have anywhere near as good of a follow-up. Yes, Eagle Warriors can be quite powerful, which is why they're still obviously in D tier, not F tier. But their Eagle Warrior play is going to be worse than both Aztecs and Mayans. They don't have the economy bonuses of the Aztecs or the production bonuses. And the extra Pierce Armor on your Eagle Warriors is generally not quite as good as the extra attack or extra HP of the other two Amerindian civs. But still, Eagle Warrior play can always be quite, deadly if the situation is correct. And Kamyuk's situationally useful, Slinger's situationally useful. It's not like they're horrible, it's just, again, lacking anything really to stand out. Rounding out our D tier will be Ethiopians, which are a civilization kind of like Incas and Magyars that are a lot stronger in land maps than they are on these sorts of hybrid maps. Ethiopians are actually, unlike the two civilizations above them, I think, really strong as a flank in a team game on Arabia. So it's not like they're not suited to team games, it's that I don't think they're that suited to Nomad in particular. Their navy is certainly nothing too special. And yes, you can get a fast castle off pretty decently, but like fast castle crossbowman play, it's just not as powerful as it would be on a land map, or at least a more land-centric map, just because crossbowmen, you generally want to mass them up a fair bit in the feudal age, and then once you get castle age, you can get crossbow and bodkin and have that big power spike. But because you are, generally speaking, ramping up to the mid-game that much more quickly, units that are more population efficient tend to be a bit more powerful, like your siege and monks and knights and that sort of thing. And Ethiopians don't really do those things that exceptionally well. Also, in the late game, you do have a very strong slow push with your siege and halbs and arbalests, but it's not as good a slow push as, say, like, Portuguese or Koreans or anything like that. And they just kind of fall short, and then again, not really any sort of long-term eco bonus to help them out. I still do put them in D tier because you do have very real strengths in the mid to late game, but it's just, again, it's nothing too special. And unfortunately, rounding out our civilizations, our bottom four are F tier. We just have 4 civs that aren't good on most maps, and especially not good on Nomad. Teutons, Yeah, you have a nice economy in like the mid to early late game, if that makes sense. But kind of like Slavs, you're disincentivized from farming early on because you're making fishing ships, and Teutons have a horrible navy, so you're not really taking full advantage of that bonus in the cheaper farms. Yes, you have a very good tower rush, but if you don't start near people, then things can become a very big problem because your civilization is just so freaking slow. Again, like good siege, they do have paladins and halberdiers and stuff, but it just feels like other civilizations kind of do that better. And if this were a land map, I'd certainly put them a lot higher, but it's not, and it's not even a very closed map. I mean, it can be very choke pointy, but if you get like landed or something when you think you're walled, then you could be in a really big problem. And yeah, it's the Teutons, I think, just don't quite cut it as a civ on Nomad. Khmer will be 29, and yeah, I mean, it's no secret that I'm not a big fan of Khmer as a civilization in general, and Nomad isn't really a map that plays to their strengths that much at all. I mean, the not needing to build buildings to advance to the next age, I don't really see that being too especially useful. They do actually have a very good naval tech tree that is something that is going for them for sure. They only miss heavy demo ship, if I recall correctly. But, I mean, other civs have broad naval tech trees and have other bonuses that are just generally more relevant. I mean, elephants are going to be really hard to make work early on. One, it's kind of expensive to get them going. Kind of expensive. It's incredibly expensive to get them up and rolling, as they're just their upgrades and then just the per unit cost. It's very very high and is very very countered by monks and halberdiers. So if your opponents are already going for those things, the elephants can kind of just be running into a meat grinder, and that's no fun. Yes, you do have very good siege beyond that, but you are missing siege onager. And again, it's kind of like Teutons. It's just kind of like other civs do what they do better because they have more relevant bonuses, both in general and especially specific to Nomad. Goths will be our penultimate civilization. Again, they have no real bonus that helps them on Nomad, economy-wise or navy-wise, or like just fast castle doing whatever. I guess you could go fast castle Huskarls, but then you're trying to boom behind it, and it can be kind of tricky, especially when you have very few defenses. Yeah, I just think Goths are kind of a weak civilization in general right now, and Nomad certainly doesn't do them any favors, just as a map type, or even team games as a general game type. And rounding everything off will be Vietnamese, everybody's least favorite civilization. If there was a poll for like what is everybody's least favorite civilization, I feel like Vietnamese would win that dubious honor. And that's just because they play like a worse Mayans, I feel, in general. And yeah, that's kind of the case on Nomad. Unless you're going up against purely like very strong archer civs, then Vietnamese are going to feel quite weak, and then even then you don't have any economy bonuses. The one Nomad specific bonus they do have is that knowing where your opponent's town centers are at the very beginning of the game, because the way the Vietnamese bonus works is essentially it turns on whenever your opponents complete their first town center. That can be quite nice, but it's nowhere near enough to overcome their shortcomings in terms of economy bonuses and the lack thereof. Tech tree that isn't especially impressive, and they're just generally a fairly mediocre and underwhelming civilization, which, unfortunately, their lack of being able to do anything that feels super powerful at any point is why I have to put them at dead last, unfortunately. You're not totally screwed if you roll one of these lower civilizations. Yes, things can be a bit harder, but overall, I think the big nomad picture can be heavily balanced by just the way players happen to spawn. So that's why I think, yes, it makes it less competitive as a tournament map format, but it can make the random civ generation not as big a deal potentially. So there you have it, guys. There is the official Ornlu AoE Big Nomad tier list for patch 5.8. Hope you guys had fun. And maybe even learn something, maybe. But obviously, like I said, this is just supposed to be a fun little thought experiment. Nothing really too serious, as there aren't really any big like tournaments that take place on Big Nomad yet. But thank you all so much for watching again, and I will see you guys next time.